Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, wherever in the world you may be joining us from today. My name is Francesco Del Carpio, and I am the CFAL York Operations Coordinator. I would like to officially open the fourth session of the Environment, Social, and Governance in Practice speaker series with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge and recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territory upon which our campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. The area is known as Tkaronto and has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and that the territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. As this is an online event, our participants may be joining from various locations, so I strongly encourage you to learn about the traditional land upon which you are located. With this, I welcome our speaker and our participants from around the world. Welcome to our webinar. As I will also be moderating today's session, I would like to welcome and thank today's speaker, Emrul Hasan. Before introducing him, I will just briefly go over some housekeeping rules. The chat will be left open for all audience members to make general comments and conversation. It will be monitored, but not for questions, so please be sure to ask your questions in the Q&A function of the webinar. If you have a microphone and would like to ask your question directly, please raise your hand and we will give you permission to talk once the Q&A portion of the session begins. The Q&A will follow the presentation, but feel free to post your questions at any time throughout the session. Without further ado, I would now like to welcome and introduce our speaker, Emrul Hasan. Emrul Hasan is a highly experienced and sought-after transformational leader, experienced in executive leadership and management, focusing on strategic planning, development, and execution of international humanitarian and development, ESG, CSR, and DE&I initiatives. He is a certified sustainability professional with extensive knowledge of ESG reporting, standards, and frameworks. Emrul has worked with a variety of organizations across different sectors, including finance, retail, and extractive industries globally, helping them with sustainability, ESG, and DEI strategy, reputational and regulatory risk management, social impact measurement, and net zero pathway strategy. He has also worked with various governments and developed organizations in 27 countries, designing, implementing, and evaluating high-impact social and economic development programs. Currently, Emrul is the Vice President of Global Programs at CARE Canada. Before this, he held various senior leadership positions, including Vice President of Citizenship and Sustainability at Hill and Knowlton's Corporate Advisory Arm and Vice President of Program Effectiveness and Quality at Plan Canada. Emrul has also worked at Plan International Bangladesh, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and UNDP UNCDF. He was a member and co-chair of the CSO Partnership Advisory Group, which advised Global Affairs Canada on implementing CSO's partnership policy. Emrul also served as the executive lead for the DEI effort at Plan Canada and was a member of the Anti-Racism and Equity Council of Plan International. He is also an advisory board member of the Gen Air Disrupting Design Initiative of Whirlpool Canada. Emrul is recognized as a thought leader in international development, ESG, CSR, and DEI, and his expertise is frequently sought by media, governments, and international agencies. He has been invited to speak at over 25 high-profile conferences, including the United Nations General Assembly, intersessional UN expert meetings, and the Senate of Canada at the Standing Senate Committee hearing on human rights. Emrul, thank you so much for joining us today. We very much look forward to your presentation, and the floor is yours.
It's been 4 years, but I still struggle to mute and unmute myself in the webinar. Welcome everyone. I know that many people around the world are attending this webinar. I can see people from Germany, Bahrain, and many other places. So listen, I will take you through some of the slides, and we'll talk about. I call it like a hot cake that that we see globally right now is conversations around environmental, social, and governance, which is ESG. What I'll do is I will combine some of these slides, which will have, of course, some theoretical frameworks. I think it's very important to understand those, but not so much on theory, but more on practice. trying to see what is going on in ESG and what are the implications and what do we have in front of us. I want to make it fairly I would love to have like informal conversations, but I don't think virtually it is possible. But let's make it as interactive as possible. But and bear with me, sometime I might go into a very technical field of ESG, but quite often I'll try to bring it back to the earth and have conversation around this exciting topic. I might speak very quickly sometime, and Francisco, you can just text me saying that I'm speaking too quickly. At times, I get too excited or passionate. That's my limitation as a presenter. So let's jump in. ESG. What we will do today is we will focus on a few areas of ESG. As I said, we're going to create a baseline of understanding around sustainability and ESG. And we quite often hear this terminology used or talked about everywhere. And then try to portray a picture or a landscape of ESG, what is happening globally in North America, in Europe. And we know that they're all interconnected. And there's so much discussions around standards and the framework, the reporting, and a lot of new world order is changing the conversations around it. So I'm going to focus on that and focus on the trends that I personally see working with so many different organizations globally, but at the same time having conversations with ESG expert, and I call it ESG enthusiast, as well as corporate leaders, and try to portray the implications, and then we'll have a question answer. And as Francisco, you mentioned, you can throw your questions in the chat box or ask those questions at the end. So let's start with this. This particular quote I picked because I really like this quote, but at the same time, it reminds me of this last 3 years, especially since 2018 and 19, not 3 years, more than that, pre-COVID, let's put it this way, it feels like that day. There's so much conversations around ESG suddenly started picking up. And this is how Larry Fink from BlackRock, he's a CEO, one of the largest asset management investors in the world, see things, and what he's encouraging CEOs in all the businesses that he invests in to think about their approach to business. And I particularly look at the last line, which is the purpose is the engine of long-term profitability. It gives so many different dimensions whenever we discuss about ESG. There's a tension between moral obligations to a business imperative. I think this particular quote try to balance that kind of conversation, and we'll jump into that one later on. It also shows we're dealing with a massive growth in demand from private sector to define and promote their sustainability, ESG, whatever you call it, and we'll create that baseline very, very soon. Now, it is not the end of the story. Sustainability will keep evolving. One of the things, whether we like it or not like it, whether we go anti or we try to become pro ESG, this particular quote neatly shows how some leaders, it is not just about compliance or reporting or meeting minimum standard or expectations. For some, it is a fundamental part of their vision for business becoming a net positive force for society, which basically tells us how critical it is to think about ESG not only from a moral imperative perspective, but there's a huge business case. And a lot of brands are almost like rebranding over the last a few years, I would say 6-7 years, start to rebrand their product, rebrand their services, rebrand their businesses from the perspective of ESG. And that tells us how critical it is to really start to have more conversation and real work to take this ESG forward. Now, I like this particular slide because, I've taken it from somebody, but I really, really like this slide. And the reason is this. I remember in 2016, I was talking to, I was doing some work for H&M, and I was talking to some people as part of the conversations with some folks in H&M and outside H&M in the supply chain. And quite often, whenever we used to talk about sustainability or ESG, people think it is about, have some money to spend on CSR, corporate social responsibility, get a person in the company who can become a sustainability manager, and then the most famous one, growing trees. I think quite often we forget it is more complex than that. It is linked with the business and linked with the work that we do. It is about driving organizational change. And I call it, it is almost driving your rebranding exercise in the organization. It is about working with your supply chain to reduce impact. It is about policies. It is about climate change impact. It is about CSR as well, that biodiversity, emissions, reporting, and most of all, it is about empowering employees and many other stakeholders that we work with. So it's more complex than it is. I wish it was very simple. Just hiring a manager or doing CSR would answer these very complex areas of work. Now, what does it mean? And as I said, I personally feel it's no longer a moral imperative. It is a business imperative in reality. It has become one of the most critical success factor, and I want to put it out there, is a strong and lasting reputation. Reputational capital has become very critical for business globally. Your brand, your business success based on your reputation, and your reputation in the era of, I call it, open information. So you can say whatever you want to say in social media. You can, talk about brands. You can talk about products any way you want to. It is important that you have a big shield that protects your brand, and by doing really great work within your business propositions and your work outside. And therefore, it is no more a CSR, it's no more triple bottom. You'll quite often hear these three words are throwing into the table. They can be used interchangeably. They can be used interchangeably: purpose, ESG, and stakeholder capitalism. Now we're going to focus on ESG. ESG is basically purpose. We're going to debate about whether it is ESG, whether it is purpose, and all kind of stuff. Is all interlinked? They're all same. On the ESG front, if you look at from a company perspective, it has got three elements there: environment, social, and governance. Is about how a company manages its impact on the planet, climate change, including greenhouse gas emission, waste, pollution, resource depletion, deforestation, and many, many things. On a social side, how it manages relationship with employees, suppliers, consumers, and the communities in which it operates. On the governance side, how it manages risk, compliance, and its ethics. And its structure is leadership, executive pay, audits, internal control, stakeholder rights. So it's all about how can you make your business operation so much geared towards doing not only good for the world, it is also how you structure your business to do good for the world and running your business successfully. Now, it's just to remind you that, it's not about someone within the company who basically says, oh, one thing, we're going to do ESG because it's a good thing to do. As I said, it's become business imperative. And the pressure that companies around the world are getting, not only from within, but from outside, especially from the three biggest one, I call it: consumer, investors, and employers. And obviously, what we see over the last 5-6 years, there's a lot of interest from regulators, a lot of interest from other partners and the civil society organizations to push for something that can be done good by the business. But then because it's a business imperative, it is not only doing good because you want to do good, it is also making sure that you're doing it in a way that contributes to the society as a whole. There's an interesting thing here. A lot of research has been done on this one, and what came out, and I just tried to put them into, consolidate those findings into the 3 points. Organizations who are really managing ESG performance, they found that it has become a critical driver for investor decision making. It also strengthened the employer propositions, drive employee recruitment, engagement, retention, and also by doing and communicating a strong ESG proposition and performance drives business performance and resiliency, which are very critical. It's almost like business case for doing ESG and doing it well. Now, this one, I just want to take you through a little bit more. We also know not all business are the champion of ESG. Depending on which sector you are operating in, depending on which country you are in, depending on what is the status of your business, you will quite often find they, if you look at their sustainability, their engagement in sustainability or ESG field, they belong to a certain group of in this spectrum. And I'm going to just focus on first one a little bit and then show you other 3. Quite often, what we have seen, and in my experience working with a number of brands, and I remember one of the brands, obviously can't name that, but one of the brands, and I was having conversations around ESG, our sustainability, and they were telling me, Emrul, tell us what we need to do minimum, like the minimum that will keep our risk away, and we will be just compliant. So quite often you will see a lot of organizations in this one. I worry about this kind of organizations unless they say they are starting the journey to become the end of the spectrum, is that by doing just a compliant work and doing work just to do a minimum requirement can do more harm than good. So I get worried about it unless they say, no, this is the start of the beginning, and we're going to go through that journey in the spectrum and go to levels where we can be all proud of our ESG work. Second one you will see quite often, and most of the corporate organizations globally are in this one, where they have some target, they have a broader scope, better connectivity, they are in the reporting stage, because they have to report, or they are reporting, or they're disclosing, they get serious about it. They want to talk about this more and internally work out how to really rebrand or re-strategize their business operations to do it well. Some of the organizations which are basically serious about it, they're becoming more tactical. They're opportunity-based. Their scope includes partnership with organizations which can help them or help their ESG work or take their ESG work to the next levels. They have a better awareness. Their management and shareholders are taking it very seriously. But most importantly, and this is the one where we would like many organizations to go, becoming more strategic. So it's not only about, hey, we're doing it, we're tactical, we're reporting. We are putting this part of the strategy. We're changing the way we operate. We are creating scope and awareness. We have a fewer boundaries. And many organizations, those organizations who are being part of the strategy, you will see their performance in ESG work is not only showing in their reporting, but is also showing in their brand and their business performance. All right, so let's look at the trend. And these are the trends which many of you will be able to resonate. First one, quite often we see, and especially there's a crowded commitment in 2021. There's increased commitment, and there's a lot of buzz around net zero commitment, and they're focused on net zero. Now, quite often people forget zero emission is not only about reducing carbon in the atmosphere. It is also to a wider transformation of the business model. Unless you have made that transformation, making a mere commitment or doing sporadic work around net zero emission reduction might not give you the results that you want to get. There's some good news. 1/5 of the 2,000 largest 2,000 publicly traded companies in North America and Europe have committed to net zero targets. It's good. They have made that commitment. Some of the organizations we have seen have not only made the commitment, but also started to report against what exactly they're doing. And I'm going to touch a little bit on that one when we talk about reporting and all of stuff under this. In 2003, and I think it's beyond, we expect to see companies' net zero pledges to be part of the is going to be put into the test since for a number of reasons. One is there is a increased interest from regulation or regulatory board or regulatory body, and also tremendous pressure from their consumer investors and their employee. As well as the other stakeholder that I've shown. There's a lot of interest around the performance, right? But the bad news is, quite often we see many companies struggle to count or measure their emission, the scope emission. Quite often they focus on scope 1, which many of you, if you are working in this area, you know, scope 1 is the direct emission made by the company. But more and more companies are moving into scope 2, which is their supply chains and the companies or bodies which are directly related to their operation. But there is a huge cry to start to report on scope 3 emissions. And we know that over 90% of organizations, even more, 95% of organizations are not equipped or are ready to measure scope 3 emissions, which puts a lot of challenge in terms of really measuring this whole emission area and take actions against it. March 21, 2022, when United States Stock Exchange Commissions announced mandatory climate risk disclosure, it basically opens up a new form of discussion or conversations around how serious you need to be to make sure you not only commit, but you also measure, disclose, and take actions to really go through a journey to have a net zero emission or net zero impact on the planet. The second one, which is divesting, which is very, I've got it, controversial, divesting fossil fuels, focus on renewable energy. Now, the challenge of cleaning investment portfolio from carbon will become very stronger. And we can see that. The big investment bank and fund already started having either conversations or actions against it. One of the companies I can think of, the Dutch pension fund, they basically decided to step away from fossil fuel investment. And like them, many others are started to follow that. According to the Institute of Economic, Energy and Financial Analysis, 150 major global financial institutions have implemented policy to exit coal, with 65 financial institutions committing to stricter lending guidelines. However, there are big companies and financial institutions, and some of them are from North America, and many of them are from Canada, are failing to decide on a very, very complex issues around divestment and really propose some kind of transition plan. If you read a report called Banking on the Climate Chaos, which was published in 2022, you will see how many are struggling on this front. And it is very important that unless you have a clear understanding and a strategy around divestment, and you have a very good transition plan, it is very difficult to see how they're going to move away from these fossil fuels and focus on renewable energy. The next one, which is circular, incorporating circular economy. In 2020, it started in 2021, 2022, there are a lot of conversations around it. A lot of work has been done by many companies. But in 2023 and beyond, what we expect to see is every company to look at the way they become more efficient by taking a closer look on how they manage waste to ensure product durability and repairability, explore the market of refurbished product, and to study if and how they can implement to take back a recycling program. This will include taking a close and deep look into the supply chain to know exactly who their suppliers are and communicate to the consumer who their suppliers are. It's very important. Many consumers are asking these questions. I remember back in times, we never cared about who the suppliers were. But now there's a conversations and then almost like a push for information around the supply chain. They want to understand what is happening, who are your suppliers, what they're doing. This will look, this conversation will lead to the need for advanced tool that will incorporate artificial intelligence, which will allow monitoring of suppliers' ESG and sustainability information, leading to informed decisions about each suppliers. So you see this is becoming almost like a norm. This is a favorite topic of mine, and the reason is this: if you look at a sudden conversations that started during COVID-19, especially COVID-19 taught us there are a broad lot of social issues in front of us, including some of the events that happened in North America. And one event I remember is the killing of George Floyd, or many other events that basically reveal significant systemic issues in this area. There's a one report, I think it's a Schroders 2021 global investment study, found that 57% investors globally said that social issues had become more important to them during the pandemic. And it continues. It didn't dip after the pandemic or post-pandemic. The problem is not many companies know how to do this well, or how to measure whatever they're doing. The CSR or mere CSR of doing, corporate social responsibility, doing, food supplies or helping 10 youth here and there is not going to cut this. It is more than that. But because of lack of capability, let's put it this way, or understanding how to measure this, what we see, there's a lot more spotlight on environment rather than social, but it is picking up. It is becoming very, very critical. And it will become very critical as we go forward, because we see a lot of investors even asking for good diversity, equity, inclusion strategy, and their social strategy and social license to operate has become almost like a norm for many companies operating outside developed countries. So next one, which basically I learned more from my own son, who is a Generation Z. I see how they're gaining purchasing power, but most importantly, how aware they are as a consumer. They are basically questioning everything, starting from where the product is coming from, are the environment, did that company take environmental consideration? From my own experience, I can say my son, before he buys anything, he asks like 10 different questions, which are extremely exciting, but it also poses a lot of challenge for the companies to really look at this particular consumer group, which is becoming their current and the future consumer, to really change their strategy to respond to their demand for doing better for the planet, for the society, and therefore it is becoming extremely critical point for companies. Finally, and then after that, there's a one which I will talk a little bit more than the way I'm talking for each point, is measuring biodiversity impact. But the most important one is the greenwashing scrutiny. Now, on the biodiversity, it has picked up very, very recently, especially from COP27 to COP28. We see that a lot of conversations on biodiversity. Mandatory reporting of biodiversity is very rare in this part of the world, but what we have seen in UK and in Europe, the demand from companies to report on biodiversity or corporate biodiversity footprint is becoming almost like a norm. There's almost like a cry to report on this one. So this will pick up as we move forward. Now I'm going to touch base on a greenwashing scrutiny. It has become very popular as the companies to demonstrate real actions and to be transparent is growing. If you look at a lot of ESG report published by the companies, first of all, they're very difficult to read because they're like over 100 pages. But at the same time, the way they're packaged is almost like very difficult to see what is the real actions or impact they're achieving versus what they have committed. What happened is, if you see the consumer groups and regulator, they started to put pressure on this transparency. There are many examples of banks or financial institutions being sued by the regulators because of their mismatch between what they have published and what they have done. If you read the report of Corporate Climate Responsibility Monitor Report in 2022, that basically highlights how much gap we have between the actual achievement and the performance. Unless we have a good regulations or good scrutiny around that, this will become almost like an eye wash for many companies to say they're doing more than that they're basically doing, and you will see the scrutiny is going to increase significantly as we move forward. Now, last part of it. This is one of the things that you see are being talked about it more than anything else. A lot of focus on improved ESG data, increased reporting and disclosure requirement, and quality of ESG work. And the reason is very simple. We've seen it has, the whole discussion on ESG has taken is taken off. So more regulators and investors are increasingly requiring companies to disclose their ESG performance, right? The complicated bit is that there are lots of different metrics and lots of different frameworks, and I'm going to show you some of them. It's overwhelming. Some people call it ESG alphabet soup. Some people call it, oh my God, you look left, you look right. There's so many different standards. The framework is so difficult to decide which one will make sense. There's also another element to it. Not all standard framework serves the purpose, right? So there's a need for credible or widely accepted standard. There's some good news, which I will talk about. As I said, it's about reporting against standard frameworks. But it is not only reporting it, it's also how much work you're doing to make sure you're achieving real impact, so that you can not only talk about it, you also can disclose it openly and share with wider audience. As I said, there's no single standardized way to capture, communicate ESG performance. Believe it or not, there's over 600 plus ESG frameworks, list, ranking, rating, and scorecard. Each evaluates company based on different criteria, which can result in widely varying scores. It is an increasing effort to align them, and we see the recent formation of International Sustainability Standard Board, which basically made some progress of creating global sustainability standard. But what I'll show you, this may not be the solution. This may not be the final solution. There are a lot of more complexity in this than just creating a global sustainability standard. Before that, let me just show you this. And I particularly share this slide with everyone, first to overwhelm people, but also to see how complex this area of standard and framework in ESG. If you see these ones, there's so many different standards and frameworks and certifications and rating and rankers. This basically pose a lot of challenge of pick and choose and make sure that you're choosing the right one. Make sure you're choosing the one that is helping you not only improve your reporting and disclosure capabilities, but also pushing your ESG performance to get better and better. Why do I say that? If you look at this one, I'll just show you plot some of the framework or standards and talk about from a perspective of your different kind of scope of reporting and your audience. So if you look at this one, see if you have a big scope of reporting, if you want to report on CSR, ESG, sustainability, all of them, and if your audience is broad, you'll go into global reporting initiatives with GRI. But then if you have like narrow, you want to focus on climate, you want to focus on environment, you have a narrow, only investors are your audience, you will choose the task force for climate finance disclosure, or if it is higher, you choose SASB. So there's so many to choose from based on your reporting and audience. So it is important that we understand while developing this global standard that we take this under considerations and make sure that we are able to consolidate and compile those standards and framework in a way that will be more useful for the companies to focus on the ESG impact work and reporting it really, really well. Same story when you plot this for any rating. Many companies ask me quite often, hey, which rating company I should go for? Should I go for Sustainalytics? Should I go for ISS ESG? And I always say it depends. What is your scope? It depends what is your audience. But then one thing we have realized is that audience and scope of rating agencies is very, very critical to decide, as it is very, very critical to decide which framework or which standards you're using to measure your ESG performance and report. Now, as I said, the good news is that the formation of ISSB, which was first formed out of COP26 in Glasgow, 2021, they basically decided that they're going to create this International Sustainability Standard Board, which will be part of IFRS. And the idea was to really bring all of these so many different framework and standard and really putting under one framework as one standard so that everyone can pick and choose and use it from. There are a number of elements there, and I just want to highlight, want to focus on. The good news is they basically were able to consolidate SASB, integrated reporting, value foundation reporting, the climate disclosure project, all of these under one. And they started working very closely with GRI, because GRI is the one which basically goes beyond financial disclosure. It is also about performance disclosure, but also getting influences by TCFD, which is Task Force for Climate Finance Disclosure. So there's a lot more work went on for the last 2 years. And ISSB already published their Standard 1 and Standard 2. And people started to getting acquainted with it and started to using it, which will do 2-3 things. One is it will help organizations to focus on a similar kind of standard, and we will see some kind of baseline being created as we start to use a global standard. But at the same time, I see organizations not shying away or exiting away completely from their GRI disclosure, or let's say independent SASB disclosure, or doing TCFD, which will continue to happen because, as I said, based on your operation, based on your scope of work, based on your audience, it is very difficult to just focus on one disclosure at this time. But the idea is, in the future, hopefully this will streamline this framework of reporting and standards as we move into, like, let's say, third or fourth year of implementations of ISSB standard. But this also poses one or two things. There's a big implication. Because of this global sustainability standard and consolidated informations and standards will help regulator to become more active in putting regulations. This means regulator, like for example in Canada, what we see that regulators are becoming serious to have conversation around disclosure, making scope 3 emission as part of the disclosure requirement for environment. And ISSB's standards will help regulator to really push that agenda to the private sector or corporate sector now and in the future. Now, this poses 2-3 things, and before I close it, I just want to talk about that. So this new standard, or all of these trends that we see, there are a lot of implications for corporate. Implications starting from understanding what we are trying to do in ESG. How do you decide on ESG based on the good materiality analysis, making sure that you engage stakeholders and understand how your ESG strategy is linked with your business strategy. It's not standalone on the side. There will be a lot more conversations and tension, balancing between self-regulation and regulation for sustainability work. While regulation is good, but regulation is also not good. You have to make sure there's a balancing act there. You cannot have too much regulations that will stifle the business to do their business well. How do you balance that will be something that will continue to grow. The discussions will happen more and more. The debate will be there, but I think we need to find solutions as soon as possible. Really balancing out between regulatory work versus self-regulation. And the third one, I think, is very, very critical, is how you bring private and public as well as civil society organizations together to achieve net zero commitment and also increase the impact of social, the S of ESG, so that it gets momentum, plus it gets a real impact that we wanted to see in our society and in our planet. With that note, I will stop here and take your question. Thank you very much. Francisco, over to you.
Thank you so much. That was a great presentation. It was very, very informative. So thank you so much. And I'm sure our audience also found it quite informative. So I don't see any immediate questions. So I just want to remind everybody in the audience to please ask your questions in the Q&A or raise your hand if you would like to ask your question directly. I did see that Ann Sutherland had their hand up at one point. I don't know if they're still here and wants to ask a question, so feel free to raise your hand. But I'm also quite happy to start the conversation if no questions are coming in yet. But actually, I see a couple coming in here now. So I see first, I see somebody's raised their hand, Saifullah Chowdhury. So I'll give you permission to talk first if you'd like to go ahead and ask your question now.
Yes. Saifullah, you want to ask the question or?
Yeah, I'm just going to ask the question. Thank you, Emrul, for a wonderful presentation. Very helpful. Just wanted to understand that you focused on the social aspect of ESG. So within that social aspect of ESG, does gender or issues around gender in the supply chain comes into any reporting or monitoring, or any of your thoughts, please?
Excellent, Saifullah. I didn't go into very technical aspect of each of this area intentionally, but if I may, answer your questions and go into the technical areas of work. Gender equality and integrating gender equality strategy into the social side, especially not only on the employee side, but also on a supply. If you have a supply chain that you're working with, and really look at all these barriers, gender barriers that basically put a lot of barriers for women or non-binary or many other being getting the outcomes and impact. So it is very, very critical that we integrate gender equality strategy and really analyze, do a gender analysis, good gender analysis, whenever we're designing social side of it. Like social side, I'm not saying only social side in the community, is also your employee base and your employee base of your supply chain. So having a good gender analysis, having a clarity around how we're integrating gender equality strategy into the work of us, but also into the work of governance, by the way, and also making sure that there's an articulation of gender outcome that we want to gain. Gender pay gap, there's a gender gap in the labor market. All of these are becoming very, very critical for the success of the business. Unless we are able to address them, these will become really critical areas of work for business and organizations outside the business realm. So it's very, very critical, and making sure that it is a forefront of your social strategy, if I may call it, or ESG strategy, whenever you're designing ESG strategy for your business. Does it answer your question, Saifullah?
Oh, yes. Thank you so very much.
Great. Thank you so much for the question, Saifullah. I do see there's another question in the Q&A, but I did kind of have a question kind of that builds off of what Saifullah was just asking. So I guess how my question is more towards like how companies can avoid social backlash for certain things. So I'm thinking kind of like um, some of the issues surrounding, for example, rainbow capitalism, where a lot of companies get accused of only um, supporting LGBT rights because of the increased exposure to a market and not necessarily really caring about the issues. So I mean, yeah. So I guess kind of how can the social aspect of ESG and the social strategy seem genuine from companies?
Excellent. So this was my work for almost like 2 years. I've been doing some work with companies. I was part of an initiative to develop a tool called social compass for the companies, almost like measuring their reputational capital, and how to navigate yourself through any backlash or any toxic conversations or risk. Let's put it this way. Now, one of the things that we say is that don't jump into reacting to any event that is happening around you without understanding what are those events and how they're unfolding, what are the political, social, and cultural implications while making a point or positions around it. You have to have a position. Like this is the one thing is becoming clearer and clearer. You have to have some level of positions. If there are issues around, let's say, if there's an issue, a tension around racial discriminations, there's tension around LGBTQ2 plus, there's tension around I don't want to call religious conflict, but conflict. But quite often we see the organizations that comes out with a statement or put like almost like putting a LGBTQ2 flag in your logo does not say what is your positions, right? So instead of jumping into actions, please look at why are you taking a positions, how it is linked with your practice. You may take a positions on race, but then you might not have enough evidence to support your position. So say do gap is really, really critical to look at. And once you have a positions, communicate it when it is right to communicate. Quite often we are premature to communicate. We just communicate because we want to really be part of the sprint that your other competitors are in. Most importantly, analyze whether your positions will fuel conflict or your positions will create confusion. Confusions in the community and society, also confusions about your brand. Unless you are able to do all of this, I would say just don't say anything till you are sure what to say. Learn, educate yourself on those areas. Talk to your employee base, talk to your partners or investors or others who may belong to those groups that you want to take a positions on, and really make a positions that will clarify what you stand for. Do not play a double game there, because I think in the day and age that we have right now in the open social media and everyone is journalist, it is important that you take step back, do the risk analysis, clear the positions, and communicate accordingly. But do the thing that will make you more credible when you're making those points in public.
Great. Thank you so much. That was a great answer. Very thought out. Thank you so much. We do have a couple more questions here in the Q&A. So this one comes from Shovan Chakraborty. Their question is, can experience in socioeconomic interventions in the international development sector be applied in ESG initiatives in Canada, and to what degree?
Okay, I might not be very popular with Shovan. Yes, you can, because international development sector experience that exposes you to work on social issues, some of the environmental issues for sure, and also being able to work with communities, which is very complex, and also area which is conflict areas and difficult areas, and you deal with a lot of complex issues there. That will help you to inform the ESG strategy or ESG work in Canada or by the companies. But I think what is more important for anybody who wants to work in ESG field, understand business first. Understanding business, understanding brand, and understanding what they stand for and which sector they're operating in and how they're positively or negatively impacting of ESG, and then design bespoke ESG strategy for them. So it will help because you have got a lot of experience, technical experience. But quite often what we do is we bring that perspective into the business and speak the lingo that does not resonate with the business language or business. It poses risk because you're overwhelming business, not inspiring them to do work which is right. And I'm going to give you an example very quickly. I was helping one of the cannabis companies, one of the largest cannabis companies here, and we were talking about greenhouse emissions and talking about some of the score they received or some of the evaluation they received about their culture of the organizations. And quite often, if you see the problem statement for people who are working in international development sector, because you have been doing this work for a long time, you immediately come up with solution. What I've learned while doing that kind of approach is that you miss out some critical element that only that business go through. And understanding those and linking all of this together is very, very critical. So it will help for sure, but you have to understand business first. You have to understand ESG is not only doing social work or doing environmental work. And I'll give you an example. If you're helping a bank to do ESG strategy, for them, their primary work is investing on areas which has a huge environmental impact, has got a lot to do with their investment strategy. So if we understand only environment, not understand investment strategy, we will not be able to provide right solutions for that bank or financial institution. So it's very important to understand the sector, understand what they need, and then link all of the technical that you receive from international development sector here. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I see here in the chat they've now posted thank you, very useful answer. So thank you so much. We do have another question here from an anonymous attendee who they're asking, are we doing sustainability right? And they give a bit of an example here. So if we know that the biggest source of all emissions is wars and the production and use of weapons, not only on the environmental element, but also on social, the impact is so huge where no more good can waive less harm because there is no less. So what should be the role of countries and corporations, and what role should they play?
Oh my God, this is like a question that requires like 10 hours of debate on this one. I don't want to make it complicated, but I'll say this, I agree with you. So there's no disagreement there. But I wish the war and conflict, those are under the control of medium scale or even large corporations, unless they are from a different sector which has direct linkage with conflict or war or some stuff. One of the points I made, we need to really look at public-private partnership and really see where we need to really put our effort together to reduce some of the conflict that can be reduced or that can be avoided. Now, I am not a political person or neither a political expert, expert in politics. But one thing I understand is the problem that you just articulated, which I said I agree with you, is such a complex area of work. There's a lot of discussion around UN in terms of United Nations Sustainable Development Goal. There's a lot of discussion around UN talking about sustainability of corporate. There's a UN Global Compact. UN should be playing a big role of reducing tension and reducing the prevalence of war and weapons and all of this. So I hope that time will come when all of big corporations, government, and UN, they can all come together, really address this issue. Having said that, I don't think this is the biggest source of all emission. The data says this is one of the sources, but the top three. There are sources that can be done and within our control. And I think if we can focus on those ones, because I cannot solve war problem, I'm against it. But if we all can focus on the areas that we can address and we can control, and then hope that the conversations on between the power can address those discussion on war and weapons, then we will have a better future. That's what I personally feel. But I agree with you. I'm sorry, I might not be answering your questions directly because that's not area that require more time to have conversations, to be very honest.
Yeah, that's a really big question, but yeah, thank you for your insight and your comments on that. I do want to be mindful of your time. We're almost at the end of our allotted time. There are a few more questions, but I want to make sure that um, we don't go into your schedule too much. So um, we I guess it's up to you if we wrap up or if you have time for a couple more.
I have time for one more, if it
One
is
more.
okay. Yeah.
Sure. Perfect. Thank you so much. So there's one here in the chat from Arvind Babaji, who says, what is your views on ESG by public sector? So not only focusing on the private sector, how do you see public sector engaging in the ESG world?
So this question is, thank you for this question. I think this question is part of the conversation in ESG sector as well. It all depends on, listen, whether you are private sector, whether you're public sector, whether you are NGO, all have role to play in ESG. And you have to take serious. Now, it depends on, as I said, it depends on your type of operations, type of business, type of control or power. You define how much you want to push in each of this area. Now, private sector, depending on the country, many countries we know, public sector plays a role like a private sector because they are the service provider and they control or do big operations around ensuring there's electricity, food productions, and this and that all the stuff. If you are in that role, yes, you have to take ESG very seriously, making sure that you have a ESG strategy cater to the kind of operations that you have. But if you have, let's say, smaller government, a public institution, limited roles and limited scope, your ESG will look a little different. But what I'm agreeing with you is that is not only a private sector issues, is also a public sector and also non-government organizations taking ESG based on this scope of work, because we all have a role to play. We all put environmental footprints and we all have role and a responsibility around making sure that we are able to create impact, ESG impact from our own position. So yes, it depends on what is your operation, where you're operating, how you're operating. You need to have ESG strategy. You should have ESG strategy. And many, by the way, many public institutions have started. Like for example, VRL in Canada. They are extremely serious about having their ESG strategy. You can read they're really considering a lot of good ESG strategy to be a part of their operations and all that stuff. So there are a lot of companies based on why you're operating, how you're operating. They are, sorry, public companies. They are taking ESG very, very seriously.
Great. Well, thank you so much. So that's the last question there. And so just again, thank you so much for the presentation and for those very detailed and thought out answers to all of the questions. It was a great and very, very informative, and I'm sure that our audience as well found it to be very informative for them as well. So once again, just thank you very much Emrul, for that great presentation. And thank you so much to our
Thank you.
audience for joining us and for those great questions that allowed for such a good discussion after the presentation. And so I just very quickly would just like to share my screen to show the next session that we have coming up in the series. So as many of you may know, we do have this series is ongoing and it's monthly. So our next session will be on November 8th at the same time from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And our speaker will be Andrew McCarty, and their topic will be decarbonization. So if that is of interest to you, mark that on your calendar. The notifications and reminders will be going out as they always do 1 week before and the day before. But also feel free to share it within your networks to anyone who might be interested, as registration is always open until the last session. And with that, I'll just stop sharing my screen. And again, just one last big thanks to you and to our audience for being here. We greatly appreciate it. And yeah, I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Take care.
And as well to all of our audience. So thank you so much. Take care.